Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Coffee Chats with Claire. I'm super excited to introduce our next guest on the podcast. This is Alex Raport. She's a PhD candidate in developmental psychology at USC. Before working on her PhD, she worked as a board-certified behavior analyst working with families that have children with autism. Thank you so much for joining me here today.
Hi, Claire. It's great to see you.
It's great to see you too. So let's start off with your current role and responsibilities. Can you please tell me about your study of developmental psychology?
Yeah, absolutely. So I study children's social cognitive development. I mostly work with 2 to 3 year olds looking at their help-seeking behavior. So the foundations of a lot of what I study is based on Vygotsky's social development theory, which argues that learning and development are primarily influenced by your interactions with others and your cultural environment. And a lot of the prior research that's been done has focused on the role of that knowledgeable other. So that other adult, right? That person who's going to assist or scaffold you and really help that child learn and experience new things. What we argue and what we believe is that help seeking is a really great example of that social learning, and that it's this two-way street, that yes, there are knowledgeable others, but that there's also the role that the child plays in their own learning. And that by seeking help, we see this really clear example of how children aren't just receivers of information, but that they demand from others, that they want help with their learning and to progress.
Can you walk me through a typical day or week of a doctoral candidate at USC?
Yeah, for sure. So, what's really cool about doing a PhD is that you're very much in control of your own schedule. So, apart from any teaching responsibilities that you may have or any reoccurring meetings, the majority of the work is really, really project based. And so, the week is really going to be organized towards making a lot of progress on those projects that you're working on. And you can really kind of set your own schedule about when you want to accomplish those little goals that kind of build towards the large goal. For me, the big goal is finishing data collection on a study that we're currently running and then writing up that project for publication. I also work on an applied project that's helping families with children with autism right now. So that's kind of where I'm still really primarily in that healthcare area. But a typical day for me, I usually personally like to follow kind of a standard 9 to 5. I usually start with replying to emails, checking in with my team of research assistants. So not super exciting, but just kind of housekeeping things, see if they need any support, see if anyone needs help with collecting data for the day. And then I'll spend 3 to 4 hours writing and reading and working on what we call a manuscript, which is the actual write-up of the study that's going to be submitted to a scientific journal. And then from there, I'll just kind of take care of any other tasks that come up. So random things. Doctoral work very much goes in waves. So there are weeks where I work like a usual 40 hours a week, not too bad. And there's other weeks where I'll be working 80 to 90 hours, and it's really challenging, and it's a lot of brain power. Very much depends just kind of where you're at with a project.
When do you think those bigger waves come in? Is there something that triggers that?
Yeah, great question. Definitely towards the end of a project. So if we're getting close to doing that final data analysis, if we're getting close to really analyzing those results, and we're getting close to actually submitting this manuscript for publication, you're going to see a lot more man hours have to be put in, or woman hours in this case, have to be put in towards finishing that project.
What do you think are some of the most pressing issues in your fields of work, and how do you think that they can be addressed?
Yeah, so the biggest issue is definitely what we call the replication crisis. So this is an issue that's throughout psychology, but it's also seen in science in general. I can see you nodding. You've probably heard of this.
Yes.
And basically what it is that researchers are facing the really, really difficult task of replicating and reproducing findings from past studies. So this raises a lot of concerns, right, about the reliability and the validity of these findings, these things that we teach when we teach a psychology course. And so is this a problem? Excuse me. Replicability is a standard of scientific research. If we aren't replicating our studies, then how are we conducting really, truly cutting edge science? And the first kind of issue as to why this even occurs is because of publication bias, that journals that publish our scientific work are more likely to want to publish significant results, right? So what happens is that if these studies find non-significant results when they're replicating a past study, they aren't as likely to publish it, meaning that the scientific community doesn't know about these results. What do? The first thing is that we really just need to conduct more replications. So the more that we're reproducing, the more that we're trying, the more the journal is going to be inundated with these different studies, and eventually they're going to have to publish, right? It's not as fun as finding something new and novel, but it ensures that we have greater credibility moving forward as a field.
That's so interesting that you mentioned this because I was just learning about it in my it's like a half psychology, philosophy, anthropology kind of class.
Totally.
But we just read an article about it, and it's interesting too because the researchers want to find more research rather than like
Right.
redo research too.
Exactly.
And I also learned about how like different cultures and societies like result in different ways. So it's hard to do a study that's like global and applies to everyone.
Right. But so needed. So needed.
How do you feel your fields of study evolving in the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, great question. I see really two things that I think are going to happen. The first is that the field is really interested in understanding children's understanding. So we have all these underlying cognitive mechanisms that we know about, but we're really curious to see like how do children understand those? So for example, we know children are really great imitators, right? They can imitate other people's behavior and they're super awesome at it. And that helps with their social learning. But do children themselves know that by imitating others' behavior, they're engaging in a learning behavior? So that's kind of the first shift is I think we're starting to less question what are the cognitive mechanisms, but more do children themselves have an understanding of those cognitive mechanisms? The second is that I see the field really shifting more towards applied work, meaning that what do all of these concepts, all of these mechanisms that we know about, these are all great, these are really interesting, but now the question is how do we share that information in a way that's actually going to help people?
How do you think it's going to help people?
Really depends. I mean, I think a lot of developmental work is very focused on education initiatives. So a lot of what we do has really big impact on like the policy that we go through, the way that we teach preschoolers. I mean, for me personally, right, that's the age group that I'm looking at, daycare and preschool. But a lot of developmental psychologists are looking at middle childhood, elementary school. And a lot of the changes that you see in the way that we educate that age group comes from this research that we're conducting at these universities. So how do we take all of this great information, but then actually make it something that could be applied in a classroom, in a place where we don't have perfect controlled variables, where we don't have a lab, in a place where there's a lot of other stressors that are going to be coming in.
That makes a lot of sense. Let's switch gears to your journey.
Mm-hmm.
So, where were you for high school, and when did you know that you would be going into healthcare?
Yeah, great question. So I went to high school in Davis, California at Davis Senior High School. And I knew pretty early on, I'd say probably ninth grade, that I wanted to go into healthcare. I had a really huge interest in science, biology in particular. I know you had mentioned taking an anatomy class. I also took an anatomy class. I loved it. And for me, I was like, wow, this is really sparking something in me. This is what I want to do. I took like all the AP science classes that my high school offered. I even took a biotech class where I interned at UC Davis and worked in a lab. And I also worked at a local hospital. So for a long time, the plan was to become a medical doctor. I was very passionate about wanting to go into that field. I loved working with people. I loved the science that was behind the healthcare. And I knew that my career would take me in a direction that allowed me to do that. At the time, I didn't really know about psychology too much. Even having taken a high school class in it, I didn't really have a grasp of what like a career in that field actually looks like. So I stuck with medical doctor, but that changed when I got to college. Yeah.
Yeah, so speaking of college, what was your major, and were there any classes or teachers that inspired you to continue into graduate school?
Yeah, so I was a psychology major in college. I changed my major a few times. I went in as pre-med, switched to sociology, switched to psychology eventually, and I'll talk a little bit more hopefully about like my encouragement for all of you to be open to change. But I attended Pepperdine. Like I said, initially was pre-med, and the plan was still to be a medical doctor at the time. But that changed when I took a marriage and family class, like a class focused on marriage and family therapy, and I took a psychopharmacology course. So by that point, I had a better grasp on what psychologists were, what they did, but I was still a little bit unclear about like, how do I get there? How do I get from here sitting in my undergraduate classes to actually working working as a psychologist. So the professors that taught those courses were really upfront about how, I could get a master's degree, I could work with families as a marriage and family therapist or as a behavior analyst, which is the direction I ended up taking, right? Working with families and children with autism. And then my psychopharm professor was the one who really kind of put like PhD on the radar. At the time, I was pretty locked in on wanting to do a master's degree. So a lot of what I was doing was really focused on getting into that. But from how the professors kind of talked about the path forward and what it looked like, that's when I ended up deciding to drop pre-med. I went full on into psychology and kind of always had in mind, I want to do graduate school, definitely a master's, potentially even the doctorate.
While in college, how did you try to distinguish yourself in such a competitive field with so many other students interested in psychology?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I did a couple things. So I got an internship in undergrad in psychology, but that's really difficult to do. So it's a field where, for obvious reasons, you can't really be around clients unless you're highly trained to work with them. And so they're not just going to allow like a sophomore in college to just drop them into a medical clinic and be like, here you go work with some patients. But what I found was that I could work in the field of applied behavior analysis. So I got a job. I was working with autistic individuals, particularly young kids, and I was working with their families. And I was able to do that while I was in college because how the field functions is that you have the behavior analyst who's gone on to get a master's degree, and then they're in charge of teams of people who are actually working with these families directly. And so I was able to do that. I was able to be the person like in the home, in the school, working with these kids. And from there, I was able to meet a lot of behavior analysts who had gone to graduate school. I was able to hear about their journeys. I was also involved with research as much as I could be. So working in research with any of the professors who were running their own labs, particularly in development. I knew I had an interest in working with young kids. So that was really the focus for me. And yeah, the goal was to go into a future graduate program that I was like really dedicated to this field. I enjoyed the field. And so every move that I made in college was with that goal in mind.
What were your previous jobs and careers, and how did that impact what you do today?
Yeah, so prior to doing the PhD, I got my master's degree in applied behavior analysis. So that's the field that mostly works with autistic individuals and families with children with autism. And so right out of college, I had mentioned that I had been working in that field kind of under the behavior analyst. Out of college, I went and got my master's degree and decided like, this is what I want to do. I want to be working with these agencies and helping people. And what that really showed me was this side of the research and this side of developmental psychology that is so applied. And it was how we're taking all of these different mechanisms that we know about, looking at them in children with autism, and then figuring out how can we support them and how can we help them. And so really a lot of my experience, like directly touching healthcare, comes from that. And it was after that experience that I decided, yeah, I want to go back, I want to get the PhD, and I want to be the person on the research side of this and teaching other people and teaching other students. But it was really that experience as a behavior analyst that pushed me into that.
Is there a particular reason why you're so interested in kids, in researching kids?
I don't know. I just always have been. I was a babysitter. I'm the oldest in my family. All my cousins are younger than me. All my siblings are younger than me. So I kind of grew up around young kids. Adults are also super complicated. They have a lot more issues that they have to work on. And so for me, I'm kind of like, you know what? If I can like draw and play a puzzle, and if I can play Play-Doh, and that this is really going to help a child live a really fulfilled life, that's so cool that I can be the person to intervene now before we get to those later stages when things are a little more set in stone. I'm a big believer in early intervention. And so for me, I'm kind of like, we can make such a big difference if we're working with kids before they turn 6, as opposed to like waiting until they're 16 to do something.
I agree. That's really appealing. As we close our conversation today, I'd like to ask you for some advice.
Mhm.
What advice would you give to someone in high school who's interested in pursuing a career in medicine?
Yeah, I think doing exactly what you're doing now is a really great way to start. So, like talking to people who are in the field. Observe what a day in the life looks like if you can, right? So ask the hard questions. Ask, like, what does it look like for you in a day to day? What does it look like for you when you want to go on vacation or when you have holidays? Healthcare and medicine are not easy fields. And I won't sugarcoat it. I think that any professional you ask who is in those fields will probably tell you the same thing. It's hard work to get there. It's hard work once you're in it. You need to have a passion for it. So, yes, you're going to be helping people, but that's not necessarily the reason to get into a field in healthcare or medicine. That you really need to be passionate about it. You need to be passionate about the science behind it, the reasons that this field exists. And talking to people who are actually doing it, that's the only way that you're going to learn and discover if you also share that passion.
Is there anything that you would do differently looking back on the path that you took?
Hmm. Yeah, I think I would do more research, not working with people, but like on my own, looking into different careers. So at the time, I had a really narrow scope of what I could do with my degree, or even what the options out there were. And what, like I said, was really cool about this is because you're like opening people's eyes into careers that I didn't even know existed, right? That I didn't learn about until I was already done with college. But I would also look outside healthcare. That I know that's not the point of this necessarily, but I would look to see what jobs are out there that are still functioning within a healthcare field, but aren't necessarily as client facing as being a doctor, as being a psychologist working with patients, right? I love working with people. And so for me personally, I would never change that aspect of my career. But there are times when it's challenging. And so if you know that you're someone who like may not enjoy that aspect, looking into careers that still get you into healthcare or healthcare adjacent, but also fulfill those other parts of yourself, that's something that I wish that I had done. I wish I had taken a closer look at just what all the options are, what exists.
And finally, is there anything else that you'd like to share with our audience or any final thoughts that you'd like to leave us with?
Yeah. Like don't be afraid to change your mind. I think I said this to you when I was working with you over the summer, right? Like you don't have to be totally dead set on what you're going to do at 18 years old. I was so rigid when I was younger about what my career would look like and like what it needed to be and what I envisioned for my future. And the truth is that I have changed my mind so many times in the past 12 years, even in the past 2 years, that I've narrowed down what it is that I love in my job, what it is that I love in my career, and what I'm not willing to do. And so don't be afraid to make a change. Even if you go into college with a career declared, with a major that you know you want to be in, and you find out that that isn't for you, change it. Like, switch it up. That's what college is for. It's to learn, it's to grow, it's to discover who you are and like what you want to add to this world. And so yeah, just like this time in your life, this time when you're at the end of high school, when you're starting college, it's so unique. It goes really, really fast. And so enjoy it. Be okay to make mistakes. Be okay with the fact that you may change your mind halfway through. And I would actually, when I was thinking about this, that I would leave you all with like this advice that my advisor had given me when I was working towards my master's degree. And this is something that he would say to us when we had to make really big decisions, is that it can feel scary, right, to make these choices, but it's also so cool that you're moving towards something that you love. And so going into your career and making these decisions about what you're going to do and who you're going to be in life is just that. It's really scary cool. It's something that's going to stick with you. And yeah, even if it can be scary, it's super cool at the end of the day.
Thank you so much, Alex, for your time and your insights. The work that you do and the advice that you give is truly valuable. And to our listeners, thank you so much for joining us on another episode of Coffee Chats with Claire. See you all soon.